The crystalline walls of the Zephyrian Grand Council chamber stretched toward a vaulted ceiling that seemed to pierce the very heavens themselves. Commander Thane Blackwood stood at the center of the vast amphitheater, his weathered face bearing the permanent marks of countless battles. The scars that traced along his jaw and forehead told stories of survival that no Zephyrian in attendance could truly comprehend. His military dress uniform, adorned with medals from conflicts across 3 star systems, seemed almost primitive compared to the flowing robes and biometallic armor of the alien senators surrounding him. The silence in the chamber was deafening, as hundreds of compound eyes focused upon the lone human figure. Their multifaceted gazes reflected the ambient light like scattered diamonds, creating an almost hypnotic effect that would have unnerved a lesser man. But Thane had stared into the face of death too many times to be intimidated by mere observation. He had requested this audience through diplomatic channels, using every favor and connection he had built during his years as a military liaison between Earth and the Zephyrian territories. General Voss rose from his elevated platform, his imposing, 7-foot frame casting a shadow across the chamber floor. The Zephyrian military leader's exoskeleton gleamed with polished perfection, unmarked by the chaos of actual combat. His voice carried the artificial amplification common to his species, creating harmonic overtones that filled every corner of the vast space. Commander Blackwood, you have requested this unprecedented gathering to address our planned expansion into the Sol system. The Council finds your timing curious, given that your species has already demonstrated its inferior position through previous encounters with our reconnaissance forces. Thane stepped forward, his boots echoing against the smooth floor with each measured step. His voice, when he spoke, carried none of the harmonic enhancement of his hosts, yet it seemed to cut through the chamber with startling clarity. Honored members of the Council, I stand before you not as a representative of Earth's military command, nor as a diplomat seeking to negotiate terms of surrender. I come here as someone who has witnessed firsthand what happens when the Zephyrian Empire underestimates the species you call primitive and backwards. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the assembled senators. Several began rapid conversations in their clicking, harmonic language, while others maintained their steady observation of the human speaker. Ambassador Crix, notable for his smaller stature and more refined features among the Zephyrian delegates, leaned forward with what appeared to be genuine interest. Thane continued, his voice growing stronger as he drew upon memories that still burned fresh in his mind despite the years that had passed. You believe that superior technology guarantees victory. You measure strength by the power of weapons and the efficiency of tactics. But you have never faced an enemy that fights not just with tools, but with something far more dangerous. General, Voss's mandibles clicked in what the humans had learned to recognize as disdain. Elaborate, Commander. What could your species possibly possess that our military analysts have failed to account for in their invasion projections? The holographic display system activated at Thane's gesture, filling the space above the chamber with swirling clouds of stellar dust and debris. The image solidified into a view of the Kepler station engagement, where Zephyrian forces had first encountered organized human resistance. The scene showed a massive space station, its hull scarred and burning, surrounded by the wreckage of both human and alien vessels. This is Captain Luna Reeves, Thane said, highlighting a small fighter craft weaving between the massive Zephyrian dreadnoughts with impossible precision. Her squadron was outnumbered 50-1. Their fighters were built with technology your empire had discarded as obsolete centuries ago. By every logical calculation, they should have been eliminated within the first 30 seconds of engagement. The hologram zoomed in to show the human pilot's face through her cockpit canopy. Luna's features were sharp with concentration, her eyes blazing with a determination that seemed to burn through the display itself. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she threw her fighter through maneuvers that should have liquefied any organic pilot. Yet she continued to fire with deadly accuracy at targets that outmassed her craft by thousands of tons. Captain Reeves held that line for 6 hours, Thane continued, his voice taking on a reverence that commanded attention even from the most skeptical senators. Her fighter's systems failed one by one. Her life support gave out in the 4th hour. Her weapons overheated and her engines were running on emergency power. Yet she continued to engage your forces with tactics that defied every principle of logical warfare. General Voss's voice carried a note of frustration. Desperate acts of a dying animal prove nothing, Commander. Individual heroics cannot overcome technological superiority and numerical advantage. That's where you're wrong, Thane replied, his scarred hands gesturing toward the display as it shifted to show the battle's conclusion. Luna didn't fight alone, and she wasn't fighting for glory or tactical advantage. Watch what happens when her fighter finally takes critical damage. The hologram showed Luna's craft spinning out of control, its hull breached and engines failing. Instead of ejecting or attempting to reach safety, the human pilot adjusted her trajectory and accelerated, directly toward the largest Zephyrian vessel. The impact, while insignificant against the dreadnought's massive structure, created a chain reaction in its forward weapons array. The explosion from her sacrifice disabled the flagship's primary systems for crucial minutes, Thane explained. But more importantly, it sent a signal to every human defender in the system. They had watched one of their own choose death over retreat, and that choice transformed them from individual fighters into something your military planners had never encountered. The display expanded to show the wider battle, revealing how the human forces had suddenly coordinated their attacks with unprecedented effectiveness. Ships that had been fighting defensively began aggressive assault patterns. Ground forces that had been retreating turned to launch counteroffensives. The tide of battle shifted not because of superior tactics or technology, but because of something the Zephyrians had never learned to quantify. Ambassador Crick spoke for the first time, his voice lacking the harsh overtones common to his species. Commander, you speak of transformation, but we observe only the death throes of an outmatched force. How does individual sacrifice translate to military effectiveness? Thane smiled grimly, the expression transforming his scarred features. Because humans don't fight as individuals, Ambassador. We fight as something greater than the sum of our parts. Let me tell you about Sergeant Jake Morrison. The holographic display shifted to show a planetary surface scarred by orbital bombardment. Massive craters dotted the landscape, and the skeletal remains of what had once been a thriving colony stretched toward a smoke-darkened horizon. Among the ruins, small groups of human defenders moved with purpose despite their desperate circumstances. The colony at New Geneva was considered strategically worthless, Thane continued. No significant resources, no military installations, just 30,000 civilians trying to build new lives on a frontier world. Your forces arrived expecting token resistance before the population surrendered or evacuated. The image focused on a man in battered combat armor, his weapons scarred from repeated use and his uniform torn and stained with the evidence of prolonged fighting. Sergeant Morrison's face was streaked with dirt and sweat, yet his eyes held the same burning intensity that had marked Captain Reeves. Morrison's unit consisted of 12 soldiers tasked with holding the eastern approach to the main settlement. They faced a full Zephyrian assault brigade equipped with heavy armor and air support. The logical response would have been to fall back and preserve forces for a more defensible position. General Voss clicked his mandibles impatiently. Standard tactical doctrine. Even your primitive military understands the principle of strategic withdrawal. Morrison didn't withdraw, Thane replied quietly. He and his unit held that position for 8 days against continuous assault. They had no resupply, no reinforcements, and no hope of victory. Yet they continued to fight because they knew that every hour they delayed your advance gave the civilians more time to evacuate. The hologram showed the sergeant moving among his troops, sharing ammunition and encouraging his soldiers even as their defensive perimeter shrank under relentless pressure. His voice, captured by surveillance drones, carried clearly through the chamber as he rallied his men for another desperate stand. By the 7th day, Morrison was the only member of his unit still capable of fighting, Thane continued. He had taken 17 separate wounds, his weapon was held together with improvised repairs, and he had been without food or water for over 30 hours. Yet when your forces finally overran his position, they found him still firing at advancing troops. The display showed the final moments of the engagement, with Morrison making his last stand among the ruins of his defensive position. Even facing certain death, the human soldier continued to fight with methodical precision, making every shot count as enemy forces closed in around him. The sergeant's resistance delayed your advance by enough time for the civilian evacuation to succeed, Thane said. But more than that, his example inspired resistance movements across 17 other colonies. Your military had planned for a quick conquest of the frontier worlds. Instead, you faced years of guerrilla warfare that cost more resources than any strategic objective could justify. The chamber fell silent as the implications of the human's words settled upon the assembled senators. Emperor Nexus, who had remained motionless throughout the presentation, stirred slightly in his throne-like seat at the chamber's apex. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried harmonics that made the air itself seem to vibrate. You speak of individual actions as though they represent systematic capabilities, Commander. Isolated acts of desperation do not constitute military doctrine. Thane turned to face the Emperor directly, his posture straightening despite the weight of every gaze in the chamber. Your Excellency, that's exactly the mistake your military continues to make. You see individual actions where humans see something else entirely. We see family. The word hung in the air like a challenge. The Zephyrians, with their hierarchical society based on genetic castes and predetermined roles, struggled to comprehend the human concept of chosen bonds transcending biological connections. Captain Reeves fought not just for tactical advantage, but because her squadron was her family, Thane explained. Sergeant Morrison held his position not because of military orders, but because those civilians were his people, his responsibility, his family. When you attack humans, you're not facing individual soldiers. You're confronting a species that will sacrifice everything to protect those they love. General Voss rose to his full height, his voice carrying notes of anger and frustration. Sentiment is irrelevant on the battlefield, Commander. The Empire's forces are prepared for your species' emotional instabilities. Our psychological warfare specialists have developed countermeasures for human irrationality. Thane's laugh was harsh and bitter, echoing strangely in the crystalline chamber. Countermeasures for irrationality? General, you still don't understand. What you call irrationality, we call love. What you dismiss as emotional instability, we know as the force that makes us stronger than any technology. The holographic display shifted once more, showing archived footage from multiple human colonies. The images revealed families saying goodbye as fathers and mothers left for military service, children drawing pictures for deployed parents, and communities coming together to support those left behind. The emotional resonance of the scenes created an almost palpable tension in the chamber. Every human soldier carries these connections into battle, Thane said softly. They fight not just with weapons and tactics, but with the knowledge that their actions protect something precious and irreplaceable. That connection gives them strength beyond your calculations and determination beyond your projections. Ambassador Crix leaned forward, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic images with unusual intensity. Commander, you paint a compelling picture of human motivation, but motivation alone cannot overcome overwhelming material disadvantage. The Empire possesses resources and technology that dwarf anything your species can deploy. Thane nodded slowly, acknowledging the point, while his expression remained grim. You're absolutely right, Ambassador. In a conventional engagement, humanity cannot match the Empire's technological superiority. But we've never been a conventional species. The display changed to show technical schematics and battle reports from recent engagements. The data revealed patterns that the Zephyrian analyst had struggled to explain, where human forces had achieved victories that should have been mathematically impossible. We adapt, Thane continued. We improvise. We turn your own advantages against you. But most importantly, we never surrender. A Zephyrian commander knows when a battle is lost and withdraws to preserve resources for future engagements. A human commander in the same situation sees only another problem to solve. The chamber erupted in clicking conversations as senators processed this information. General Voss's mandibles worked furiously as he attempted to formulate a response that would restore his authority over the proceedings. Enough, the general finally declared, his amplified voice cutting through the discussions. Commander Blackwood, your warnings are noted and will be filed appropriately. However, The Empire's expansion into the Sol system will proceed as scheduled. Your species will have the opportunity to surrender honorably and accept integration into our civilization." Thane stood in silence for a long moment, his scarred features revealing nothing of his inner thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down upon every being in the chamber. "General Voss, members of the Council, Your Excellency," he said, addressing each group in turn, "I have delivered my warning. When your invasion fleet encounters human resistance, remember this moment. Remember that you were told exactly what you would face and you chose to ignore it." The human commander turned and began walking toward the chamber's exit, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. As he reached the threshold, he paused and looked back one final time. The Empire has never faced defeat because you've never encountered an enemy that refuses to be defeated. That changes now. With those final words, Commander Thane Blackwood disappeared into the corridor beyond, leaving the Zephyrian Council to contemplate warnings they were already dismissing as the desperate bluffs of a conquered species. In the silence that followed, only Emperor Nexus seemed to truly understand the gravity of what they had just heard. But by then, the invasion fleet was already assembling, and the Empire's fate was sealed. 6 months after Commander Blackwood's warning echoed through the Zephyrian Grand Council, the Imperial invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. Warlord Krex stood upon the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Edge, surveying the tactical displays that showed Earth's defensive positions. The planet appeared vulnerable, its orbital stations scattered, and its fleet formations seemingly disorganized. The warlord's compound eyes reflected satisfaction as he observed what appeared to be confirmation of the Empire's intelligence assessments. General Voss materialized beside Krex through the ship's holographic communication system, his image flickering, slightly due to the vast distances involved in coordinating the massive fleet. The general's mandibles clicked with anticipation as he reviewed the initial reconnaissance data streaming across multiple display screens. "Warlord, preliminary scans confirm our projections. The human defensive fleet consists of approximately 400 vessels, most of which appear to be converted civilian craft with minimal military modifications. Their orbital fortifications show significant gaps in coverage, and we detect no evidence of advanced defensive technologies." Krex nodded approvingly, his attention focused on the three-dimensional tactical map hovering before him. The Empire's invasion force numbered over 2,000 ships, each equipped with weapon systems that had proven effective against dozens of other species. The mathematical certainty of victory seemed absolute. "Initiate the standard conquest protocol," Krex commanded. "Begin with targeted strikes against their military installations, followed by demands for unconditional surrender. I expect this engagement to conclude within 72 hours. The first wave of Zephyrian vessels advanced toward Earth's outer defensive perimeter, their formation precise and overwhelming. The lead ships began charging their primary weapon systems, preparing to demonstrate the futility of human resistance through decisive displays of superior firepower. However, as they approached weapons range, the scattered human fleet began moving in patterns that defied conventional tactical doctrine. Admiral Zara Chen stood in the command center of the Earth Defense Station, her weathered features illuminated by the glow of tactical displays showing the approaching alien armada. Unlike the Zephyrian commanders who relied on predetermined formations and established protocols, Chen had built her reputation on improvisation and unconventional thinking. Her fingers moved across control interfaces with practiced efficiency as she coordinated defensive positions that appeared chaotic to outside observers. "Signal all vessels," Chen commanded, her voice carrying clearly throughout the command center. "Remember, we cannot match their firepower directly. We win this through adaptation and unpredictability. Make them fight our kind of battle, not theirs." The human fleet formation suddenly scattered in multiple directions, abandoning traditional defensive patterns in favor of seemingly random movement trajectories. Zephyrian targeting systems, calibrated for conventional fleet engagements, struggled to maintain locks on vessels that refused to behave according to established military doctrine. The aliens found themselves firing at projected positions where human ships should have been. only to discover their targets had moved to unexpected locations. Lieutenant Ben Cross piloted his fighter through the expanding battlefield, his craft weaving between the massive alien dreadnoughts with reckless precision. The young pilot's communication channel crackled with voices from dozens of other human fighters, all coordinating their attacks through rapid exchanges of information and instinctive cooperation. Unlike the rigid command structures employed by Zephyrian forces, the human pilots adapted their tactics in real time based on immediate battlefield observations. Red Squadron, this is Cross. I have eyes on the flagship's port weapons array. The charging sequence follows a predictable pattern, but they have blind spots in their defensive coverage. If we hit them from multiple angles simultaneously, we can exploit the vulnerability. The response came not from a single commander, but from multiple pilots who immediately began adjusting their attack vectors to support the proposed assault. The coordination occurred without formal orders or hierarchical approval, demonstrating the kind of flexible thinking that Zephyrian military doctrine could not accommodate. Cross dove his fighter toward the massive alien vessel, drawing defensive fire while his squadron mates approached from different angles. The Zephyrian gunners focused their attention on the most obvious threat, allowing the coordinated assault to succeed despite the technological disparity between the opposing forces. The explosion that followed disabled a significant portion of the flagship's offensive capabilities, creating an opening that other human units immediately exploited. Warlord Krex watched the tactical displays with growing confusion as his supposedly overwhelming advantage began to erode through a series of small, seemingly insignificant defeats. Individual human vessels continued to inflict damage far beyond their apparent capabilities, while entire sections of his fleet found themselves responding to threats that materialized faster than traditional command structures could address. General Voss, explain these tactical anomalies, Krex demanded, his voice carrying harmonics of frustration. Our forces possess overwhelming superiority, yet we continue to sustain losses that should be mathematically impossible. General Voss studied the streaming battle data, his analytical mind struggling to process patterns that defied logical explanation. Warlord, the humans appear to be employing some form of advanced coordination technology that allows their units to respond instantaneously to changing battlefield conditions. However, our scans detect no evidence of such systems. The truth, which neither Zephyrian commander could comprehend, was far simpler and infinitely more complex. The human defenders were not relying on technology for their coordination, but on something the Empire had never learned to quantify: trust. Each pilot, each ship captain, each defensive station commander operated with complete confidence that their fellow humans would support them when needed. This trust allowed for rapid decision-making and spontaneous cooperation that no predetermined tactical doctrine could match. Dr. Elena Torres worked frantically in her research facility, buried deep beneath the lunar surface, surrounded by displays showing psychological profiles of Zephyrian military personnel. The brilliant scientist had spent years studying alien behavioral patterns, searching for weaknesses that could be exploited, despite humanity's technological disadvantages. Her breakthrough had come through recognizing that the Empire's greatest strength could also become its most critical vulnerability. Commander Hayes, I need immediate access to all communication frequencies used by the invasion fleet, Torres said, addressing the military liaison assigned to her project. The Zephyrians operate through rigid hierarchical structures that depend on constant communication with superior officers. If we can disrupt those communications while simultaneously feeding them contradictory information, we can turn their organizational efficiency against them. The psychological warfare campaign that Torres launched represented a form of combat that the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered. Instead of attempting to match alien technology, the human scientist exploited the fundamental differences between species psychology. Carefully crafted messages began appearing on Zephyrian communication networks, containing information that appeared legitimate while subtly undermining confidence in command decisions. The effects became apparent within hours as Zephyrian unit. Commanders began receiving conflicting orders that seemed to originate from legitimate sources. Ships that should have been coordinating their attacks found themselves operating with incompatible tactical objectives. The rigid command structure that normally ensured efficient operations became a liability as officers struggled to determine which orders represented authentic communications from their superiors. Warlord Krex felt his certainty wavering as reports continued streaming in from across the battlefield. Units were falling out of formation, response times were increasing, and the overwhelming advantage he had counted on was dissolving into confusion. The mathematical precision that had guaranteed victory was being replaced by chaos that his forces could not effectively address. "General, I am detecting systematic communication disruptions throughout the fleet," Krex reported, his voice showing strain despite his efforts to maintain composure. "This appears to be more than simple technical interference. The humans are somehow manipulating our command networks." General Voss's image flickered as his own communication system struggled with the expanding interference. "Warlord, recommend immediate withdrawal to a safe distance while we analyze these disruptions. The current engagement parameters are not proceeding according to projections." However, retreat proved more difficult than expected. The human forces, rather than allowing the aliens to withdraw and regroup, intensified their attacks whenever Zephyrian units attempted to disengage. Admiral Chen had anticipated this moment, recognizing that her force's best chance for victory lay in preventing the enemy from utilizing their superior numbers through coordinated mass attacks. Lieutenant Cross found himself leading a desperate assault against a Zephyrian command vessel, his fighter squadron vastly outmatched by the alien ship's defensive systems. The young pilot's communication channel carried voices from throughout the human fleet, offering support and coordination despite the apparent hopelessness of the situation. "All units, this is Admiral Chen. Lieutenant Cross has identified a critical target. All available ships converge on coordinates 77 Alpha and provide support. We have one chance to end this engagement before they can regroup." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ships from across the scattered human fleet abandoned their individual engagements and rushed toward the designated coordinates, creating a massive coordinated assault that the Zephyrians had not anticipated. The aliens found themselves facing the concentrated firepower of the entire human defense force, applied with precision timing that their own command structures could not have achieved. The explosion that destroyed the alien command vessel sent shockwaves throughout the Zephyrian fleet. Without centralized coordination, individual ships began making independent decisions about continuing the engagement. Many units trained to operate within rigid hierarchical structures found themselves paralyzed by the absence of clear command authority. Dr. Torres monitored the psychological profiles streaming from the battlefield, noting the rapid deterioration in Zephyrian morale as their tactical situation continued to collapse. Her carefully designed disruption campaign had achieved effects beyond her most optimistic projections, demonstrating that understanding enemy psychology could be more valuable than matching their technology. Warlord Krex stood alone on his bridge, watching tactical displays that showed his invasion force fragmenting under pressure from an enemy that should have been eliminated within hours. The certainty that had carried him into battle had been replaced by a growing recognition that the Empire had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of human resistance. Admiral Chen's voice echoed across open communication channels, addressed not to her own forces but directly to the alien commander. "Warlord Krex, this is Admiral Chen of the Earth Defense Force. You have witnessed what happens when you underestimate humanity. This is your only opportunity to withdraw your forces and reconsider your invasion plans." The Zephyrian commander found himself facing a choice that no imperial doctrine had prepared him to make. Traditional military logic demanded either victory or honorable defeat, but the humans had created a third option that existed outside established parameters. They had demonstrated that superior technology and overwhelming numbers could be neutralized through determination, adaptability, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. General Voss's image flickered back into existence, his compound eyes reflecting uncertainty that would have been impossible months earlier. "Warlord, recommend immediate withdrawal to Imperial space. This engagement has revealed tactical variables that require comprehensive analysis before any future operations can be planned." As the surviving Zephyrian vessels began their retreat toward the edge of the solar system, Warlord Krex finally understood the truth that Commander Blackwood had tried to convey to the Grand Council. Humanity's greatest weapon was not there technology or their tactics, but their absolute refusal to be conquered. They fought not just with weapons, but with something far more dangerous: hope, love, and an unbreakable determination to protect what they valued most. The invasion fleet that had arrived with such confidence limped back toward Imperial territory, carrying with them the knowledge that the Empire had encountered something unprecedented. For the first time in their expansion across the galaxy, the Zephyrians had met an enemy that could not be defeated through conventional means. Lieutenant Cross guided his battered fighter back toward the defensive stations, his communication channel filled with voices celebrating their impossible victory. The young pilot understood that this battle represented more than a military triumph. It marked the moment when humanity proved that the strength of the human heart could overcome any technological advantage. Admiral Chen stood in her command center, surveying the aftermath of the engagement while already planning for the inevitable return of alien forces. The victory had been decisive, but she knew that word of humanity's capabilities would spread throughout the Empire, bringing even greater challenges in the future. Dr. Torres reviewed the psychological profiles one final time, recognizing that her research had revealed something profound about the differences between species. The Zephyrians fought for conquest and expansion. Humans fought for survival and protection of their loved ones. That fundamental difference in motivation had proven to be the decisive factor in determining the outcome of their first major confrontation. The message that eventually reached the Zephyrian Grand Council was simple and devastating in its implications. The invasion of Earth had failed not because of inferior planning or inadequate resources, but because the Empire had encountered an enemy that operated according to principles they could not understand or counter. Humanity had demonstrated that love, determination, and refusal to surrender could triumph over any technological advantage. Commander Blackwood's warning had proven prophetic. The Empire had learned too late that some enemies cannot be defeated, because they refused to accept defeat. The price of that ignorance would reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy, as news of humanity's victory spread to other species who had previously accepted Zephyrian dominance as inevitable. Their being, human heart, it turned out, was indeed the most powerful weapon in the universe.